It was a cold January morning in 2006 in Hopkinton, Massachusetts. Neil Antwistle lived with his wife Rachel and their lovely 9-month-old daughter Lillian. To their neighbors, they were the perfect couple, the picture of family happiness. But behind the closed doors of their home, the reality was far darker. On January 20th, Neil claimed he had to go out to take care of some urgent matters. However, when he returned home, he found Rachel and Lillian lifeless, victims of gunshot wounds. In the moment that should have been filled with desperation and a search for help, Neil did something unexpected. Instead of calling the police or alerting the neighbors, he abandoned the scene and fled to England, telling no one about what had happened. Concern only arose when Rachel's friends and family began to notice the sudden disappearance of the couple. It was then that authorities were notified. Upon arriving at the house, investigators were met with a devastating scene. Rachel lay in the couple's bed, holding Lillian in her arms, both of them dead. This moment marked the beginning of one of the most puzzling and disturbing cases in the region, leaving everyone searching for answers. The marks left by the gunshots and the position of the victims seemed at first glance to point to a possible murder-suicide. But something didn't fit. There was no weapon near the bodies, raising immediate suspicions. Additionally, the absence of signs of forced entry or robbery suggested that the person responsible was likely familiar with the house. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, in England, Neil Antwistle exhibited strange and evasive behavior. He avoided any contact with Rachel's relatives and offered vague responses when questioned about what had happened. When finally confronted, Neil claimed to be deeply shaken by the tragedy, even stating that he had considered taking his own life. However, his sudden flight and lack of initiative to clarify the events only fueled suspicions about his behavior. The police investigation began to dig deeper, uncovering secrets that Neil had kept hidden for so long. It was discovered that he was deep in debt, owing over $400,000 in financial failures. This detail cast a new light on the case, suggesting that there was much more behind that tragic event than initially appeared. As authorities delved further into the investigation, each new discovery seemed to weave a more intricate web around Neil, turning what could have been a simple case of family tragedy into an intriguing, true crime mystery. Furthermore, Neil's online history revealed unsettling searches, such as methods of suicide and frequent visits to escort websites. The image of a devoted husband and father began to quickly unravel, leaving only shadows of doubt. The real turning point in the case came with the forensic evidence. DNA tests showed that the weapon used in the shootings, which belonged to Neil's parents, contained traces of his own DNA. The trajectory of the bullets and the analysis of the wounds indicated that Rachel was holding Lillian at the exact moment of the shots, making it impossible for her to have been responsible for a murder-suicide. All the evidence pointed to Neil as the sole perpetrator of the crime. As the evidence piled up, Neil's defense began to show clear signs of desperation. He vehemently denied any involvement, claiming that he had left to take care of trivial matters and returned only to find his family dead. However, the inconsistencies in his account and the contradictions between his statements and the evidence presented made his version increasingly suspicious and less convincing. Each new discovery painted Neil in a darker light, transforming him from a loving husband and devoted father into the prime suspect in a brutal crime. The combination of his evasive behavior, irrefutable forensic evidence, and inconsistencies in his testimony created a picture that was hard to deny. Neil Antwistle was at the heart of a disturbing mystery that shook the entire Hopkinton community. The case quickly made headlines, with the media diving into the details of Neil and Rachel's lives. Close friends revealed that the couple had faced financial and emotional tensions, but no one could have imagined that it would end in such a brutal tragedy. The neighbors, shocked, began to reassess their memories of the couple who seemed perfect. The doubt hung in the air. Why would Neil do something so terrible? Was it the weight of his debts, the pressure to maintain appearances? Or was there something deeper, a hidden side of his personality that no one had ever suspected? Before we continue with this disturbing story, an important reminder. If you're enjoying the video, please subscribe to the channel and leave a like. This way, you won't miss the next cases, and you'll help support our investigative work. And of course, subscribe now. Who knows, maybe the next story told here could be yours. With Neil in England and investigations progressing in Hopkinton, the detectives found themselves facing an increasingly macabre puzzle. The material evidence was abundant, but what really intrigued the investigators was Neil's behavior after the crime. Fleeing to another country amidst a personal tragedy was, at the very least, a suspicious move. His initial account seemed carefully rehearsed, but the flaws in his story began to reveal his true intentions. As the investigation progressed, each new discovery deepened the mystery, leaving the Hopkinton community even more perplexed. What seemed like a simple family tragedy was transforming into a dark enigma, where every clue led to more questions than answers. While Neil claimed to be devastated by the loss of Rachel and Lillian, he was seen acting in a completely different manner. Police documents revealed that in the hours immediately following the crime, he searched for flights and booked a trip to London online. Witnesses stated that he appeared calm, even indifferent, something that didn't align with someone who had just experienced a family tragedy. British authorities began collaborating with American investigators, joining forces to piece together this dark puzzle. At the heart of the investigation was the weapon, a Buffin .2 revolver belonging to Neil's father. The gun was found at his parents' house in England, raising even more doubts about how it had been brought to the United States and then returned. Ballistics tests confirmed that the revolver matched the projectiles found in the victims. Additionally, Neil's DNA was identified both on the weapon and on the cartridges used, tightening the noose around him. The detectives also delved deeply into the couple's financial situation. Rachel, who had left a promising career as a teacher to care for little Lillian, had begun to question Neil's financial decisions. He had promised a comfortable life in the United States, but the reality was far from it. The debts Neil had accumulated, totaling more than $400,000, weighed on him like a constant shadow, creating an environment of tension and uncertainty within the family. As the investigation progressed, each new discovery painted Neil in an even darker light. His evasive behavior, the damning forensic evidence, and the inconsistencies in his testimony formed a picture that was hard to ignore. The Hopkinton community watched, shocked, as detectives uncovered the dark secrets Neil had tried to conceal. What once seemed like a tragic family loss was now revealing itself as a complex mystery of crime and human motivation, leaving everyone anxious for answers that could explain the brutality of the events. Beyond the enormous debts, Neil tried to maintain a lifestyle built on appearances and lies. He even created a fake business, promising consulting services that were never delivered. The financial desperation seemed to be one of the main triggers for the crime that rocked Hopkinton. The investigation took an even deeper turn when the police found Rachel's digital diary. In it, she recorded her daily frustrations and concerns. Although she never mentioned fearing for her safety, there were clear signs that Rachel had started to perceive the gravity of the financial and emotional situation her family was facing. To the investigators, it was clear that Rachel was a victim who likely never suspected the true danger lurking around her family. With the collection of evidence progressing rapidly, Neil was officially charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder. He was extradited to the United States, where he would face a trial that promised to be long and intense. Neil's defense tried to build a narrative in which Rachel would be responsible for the shootings, claiming that she, desperate due to their financial difficulties, decided to take her own life and her daughter's. However, this version did not withstand the scrutiny of the physical and forensic evidence. Experts hired by the prosecution demonstrated that the marks left by the trajectory of the shots were incompatible with the possibility of Rachel shooting herself. Additionally, the position of the bodies was crucial in dismantling this theory, reinforcing the conclusion that Neil was the sole person responsible for the tragic crime. Before we continue with this disturbing story, an important reminder. If you're enjoying the video, subscribe to the channel and leave a like. That way, you won't miss the next cases and will help support our investigative work. Who knows? Maybe the next story told here could be yours. With evidence mounting against Neil and the defense crumbling, the detectives in Hopkinton felt they were getting closer and closer to solving one of the most intriguing cases in the region. The combination of unbearable debts, meticulously constructed lies, and suspicious behaviors created a scenario where the truth, however dark it might be, was finally beginning to emerge from the shadows. Lillian was in Rachel's arms at the exact moment of the shots, something that, according to experts, pointed to an attack planned by a third party. As the trial approached, public opinion began to divide. Some, influenced by the defense, believed Neil might be innocent. On the other hand, many saw the accumulating evidence as a clear indication of his guilt. For Rachel's friends and family, watching this battle in court was extremely painful, especially because Rachel's character was being unjustly questioned. As Neil prepared to face justice, the case had already turned into a full-fledged media spectacle. Each new detail revealed drew more people into this drama that seemed taken from a movie, but was tragic and real. The trial was about to begin, promising to finally clarify everything for the public and, most importantly, honor the memory of Rachel and Lillian. When the big day arrived, the courtroom was packed with journalists, victims' family members, and curious onlookers drawn by the case's magnitude. Neil Antwistle remained silent for much of the trial, his expression a mix of coldness and apathy. His defense faced the tough task of convincing the jury of his innocence, despite the numerous pieces of evidence against him. The prosecution opened the case forcefully, detailing all the forensic evidence linking Neil to the crime. The tension in the courtroom was palpable. Every witness called, every piece of evidence presented, added weight to the accusations against Neil. The community of Hopkinton watched attentively, anxious for justice and answers to a mystery that had rocked their lives. As the trial progressed, the truth, however painful it was, began to emerge, revealing the complex motives behind this brutal act. As the trial continued, emotions ran high, and the surprising revelations kept everyone glued to the courtroom. The legal battle between the defense and the prosecution turned Neil Antwistle's case into one of the most discussed and controversial in the region, making it clear that the search for the truth had only just begun. If you're following this story and want to stay updated on the next chapters, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave a like. This way, you won't miss any details from the most intriguing cases and will help keep our investigative work alive here on Dark Dossiers. The DNA found on the weapon, along with gunpowder traces on Neil's clothes, was already enough to incriminate him. But the prosecutors didn't stop there. They went further and presented purchase records showing that Neil accessed gun sales websites just before the crime, indicating meticulous planning. Additionally, online searches related to suicide methods and escort services were included as evidence, painting the portrait of someone emotionally and financially shattered. The prosecution built the narrative that Neil, desperate over his debts and unable to maintain the facade of the perfect husband and father, saw eliminating his family as a way out. By getting rid of Rachel and Lillian, He believed he could rebuild his life without the burden of the responsibilities that plagued him. Although this theory was shocking, the body of evidence seemed to support it unquestioningly. The defense, on the other hand, tried to humanize Neil and plant doubt in the jury. They argued that his behavior after the crime, including fleeing to England, was a result of shock and desperation, not guilt. The idea of a murder-suicide was brought up again, despite already being widely refuted by technical evidence. The defense attorneys also attempted to introduce accounts that Rachel was emotionally distressed due to financial struggles, but the lack of witnesses or concrete evidence weakened this argument. It was the expert testimony that truly made the difference in the trial, exposing the defense's attempts to create an alternative version of events. Before we continue with this intense story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave a like. That way, you won't miss the upcoming chapters and will also support our investigative work. Who knows, maybe the next story we tell could be yours. As the trial progressed, the evidence against Neil became increasingly irrefutable. The combination of overwhelming debts, elaborate lies, and suspicious behaviors created a scenario where the truth, no matter how dark, began to emerge from the shadows. The Hopkinton community watched anxiously, hoping for justice and answers to a mystery that had shaken their lives. With every witness that took the stand and every piece of evidence presented, the weight of the charges against Neil became more tangible. The legal battle between the defense and the prosecution turned Neil Antwistle's case into one of the most discussed and controversial in the region, making it clear that the search for the truth was just beginning. If you're following this story and want to stay updated on the next chapters, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave a like. This way, you won't miss any details from the most intriguing cases and will help keep our investigative work alive. Who knows, maybe the next story we tell will be yours. Ballistics experts detailed how the gunpowder marks and the trajectory of the bullets ruled out the possibility of Rachel shooting herself. The medical examiner also added that the absence of struggle marks or defensive wounds on Rachel's body indicated that she was caught off guard, making it even more unlikely that she had any violent intentions that day. A crucial moment in the trial came with testimony from Rachel's family and friends. They described her as a joyful woman, dedicated to motherhood and passionate about life, contrasting sharply with the image the defense was trying to paint. Additionally, emails and messages exchanged between Rachel and Neil were presented, highlighting her efforts to maintain the marriage despite the financial and emotional problems they were facing. As the weeks passed, it became clear that the jury was being convinced by the evidence presented by the prosecution. Neil's behavior in court, often distant and emotionless, also didn't help his cause. Forensic psychologists called by the prosecution stated that the lack of visible remorse was consistent with the profile of someone who had premeditated such a heinous crime. Finally, the case reached its climax with the closing arguments. The prosecution reiterated the devastating combination of physical, forensic, and contextual evidence pointing directly to Neil as the perpetrator. They emphasized the impact of the loss on Rachel's family and called for justice for her and her daughter. As the trial neared its end, the tension in the courtroom was palpable. Every witness that took the stand and every piece of evidence presented strengthened the case against Neil. The Hopkinton community followed every detail with anxiety, seeking justice and answers to a mystery that had shaken their lives. The verdict was near, and the anticipation about Neil Antwistle's fate grew with each passing day. The legal battle between the defense and the prosecution had turned the case into one of the most discussed and controversial in the region, making it clear that the search for the truth was just beginning. In their final attempt, the defense tried to plant doubts in the jury's mind, arguing that the evidence could have been misinterpreted and that there were no eyewitnesses to confirm what had really happened in that house. However, These arguments seemed increasingly weak in the face of the overwhelming evidence presented by the prosecution. After long deliberations, the jury finally reached a verdict. Neil Antwistle was found guilty of both first-degree murders. When the verdict was announced, Neil maintained the same impassive expression he had shown throughout the trial, while Rachel's family cried, a mix of relief and deep sorrow. Shortly afterward, the sentence was handed down. Neil received 2 life sentences without the possibility of parole, ensuring that he would spend the rest of his life behind bars. For many, this was the only form of justice possible in the face of such a devastating tragedy. But even with the conviction, the case continued to raise countless questions. How could someone who seemed to have it all, a loving family, a healthy daughter, and a whole life ahead, commit such a monstrous act? The case of Neil Antwistle became a true study of the darker layers of human behavior, showing how financial, emotional, and social pressures can lead to tragic and irreversible decisions. With Neil sentenced to 2 life terms in prison, the case seemed closed in the legal realm. However, the impact of this tragedy continued to reverberate, both in the Hopkinton community and among those who followed the story worldwide. The questions left by the case were not just about the crime itself, but also about the ignored signs, the pressures Neil and Rachel faced, and how something so terrible could happen inside an apparently happy home. After the conviction, Neil was transferred to a maximum security prison in Massachusetts, where he remains today. Even behind bars, he continued to claim his innocence, although he never provided a convincing explanation for the overwhelming evidence against him. The defense, which fought vehemently throughout the trial, tried to appeal the sentence, but all attempts were rejected by the courts. The narrative of a murder-suicide was completely debunked, and Neil was left to face the reality of his situation. Meanwhile, Rachel's family sought solace in her and Lillian's memory, trying to rebuild their lives after the irreparable loss. They created a memorial for Rachel and Lillian, honoring the joy and kindness they radiated. Close friends of Rachel remembered her as a resilient woman who faced challenges with a smile and dedicated every moment to her daughter. For many, this tragedy not only destroyed a family, but also served as a warning about the dangers of appearances and the pressures that can silently erode relationships. The house where the crime took place remained vacant for months after the tragedy. Forever marked by what had happened, it became a grim reminder of the violence that took the lives of Rachel and Lillian. Eventually, the property was sold, but for the neighbors and the entire Hopkinton community, the weight of what happened there was never forgotten. Beyond the emotional impact, the case brought up important discussions about mental health, financial pressures, and the vital role support networks could have played in preventing the worst. For many experts, Neil Antwistle's story was a fatal combination of factors that had gone unnoticed or were ignored until it was too late. The overwhelming debts, the loss of control over his life, and the need to maintain a perfect facade created a scenario where Neil saw the crime as his only way out. A choice that, for any observer, was both incomprehensible and irreparable. Another widely discussed aspect was the importance of thorough and impartial investigations. The tireless work of the police in Hopkinton was crucial in dismantling Neil's claims and exposing the truth. The meticulous analysis of forensic evidence and the use of advanced technologies ensured that the responsible party was brought to justice. This case served as a powerful example of the importance of forensic expertise in solving complex crimes and preventing the guilty from escaping their actions. Even years after the conviction, the case continued to attract attention. Documentaries, books, and television programs revisited the details, trying to understand Neil's mind and the events that led to that tragic January morning. The public, fascinated and horrified, sought answers that might never be fully explained. In the end, the case of Neil and Rachel Antwistle became a symbol of how appearances can deceive and how the weight of unresolved financial and emotional problems can lead to devastating consequences. Before we wrap up this emotional story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave a like. This way, you won't miss any of the upcoming chapters and will also support our investigative work. Rachel and Lillian will not be forgotten. They were much more than victims. They were beloved individuals whose lives were brutally interrupted. Now we want to hear from you. What did you think of this case? Did you notice any signs that could have prevented this tragedy? Leave your comment, share your ideas and theories. Your opinion is very important to us, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Join our community where we uncover the most intriguing cases and tell stories that deserve to be known. Share this video and keep an eye on upcoming content. Every detail matters and every story brings valuable lessons. Thank you for watching, and we hope to see you in the next video.